You ready? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. I hope you had some amount of coffee. It's going to be a few slides. Some of them I may go a little bit quick, but still a lot of information to take, so I can always share the presentation later with you guys, okay? I'm going to be covering benchmarking data. A little bit of theory first, and then show you some slides on typical market overview presentations we do, right? Some of the things I'm going to say here is already been covered. It was very interesting, the panel earlier with Patricia, Jean, and Nick. They already touched base a little bit on this, right? They were talking about RevPAR not being enough as a metric to understand how your hotel is performing, but we also need to look at cost and profit lines, right? Benchmarking is really present in our daily life. In children, adults, we are constantly checking our neighbors, cars, trainers, everything, right? So we are constantly benchmarking without even realizing. Historically, our industry has been very good at focusing on revenue, but not so good at looking at what makes us profitable. And this is where benchmarking comes important. We need to focus as hoteliers in how we control and understand our cost structures, as well as the revenue drivers. We see some groups already working on this. For example, ISG, they have now targets on PGI instead of RGI, right? On profit generated index instead of the revenue generated index. So we are moving in the right direction. A little bit of background about where the data is coming from, right? Where the numbers come from. Back in 2019, we were collecting data from only around 3,500 hotels. The increase is significant, as you can see, and this enables us to produce really high quality reports, covering the full P&L all the way down to GOP and more than 500 indicators, right? So anybody can look at the data from any angle they want. We have 4 types of reports. I'm not going to bore you here with a sales pitch, but I just want to highlight the latest one, which is Profit Finder. It's a really cool benchmarking tool because it not only compares your hotel versus the concept, but also identifies for you all the areas of opportunity, all the indicators where you are underperforming versus your concept, and it quantifies in euros how much money are you leaving on the table for not being in line with your concept in that specific line, right? And it also allows you to create targets and track the progress. We have said this many times before, it's so important to have up-to-date information, right? This is the only way you can really identify areas of opportunity to increase revenue, reduce costs, and at the end of the day, increase profitability. The main points I'm going to cover here today is what is benchmarking, why standardization is important, which are the key metrics available, who uses the data, and how we use the data to present and give industry updates. So let's start with the benchmarking definition. There is this couple of definitions here highlighting the goal to improve performance of a company, but a moment in time. So this is it's a snapshot. It's very static data, right? Problem is that it gets out of date almost immediately. It was Next Generation brought us a continuous process, and it was Xerox that first came up with a method to evaluate performance in this way versus the competitors, right? Not just a snapshot, but a continuous process. So to bring up to life the data, we need to look at the data should be real, usable, and comparable, right? And to do this, we need to look at how to make all the different P&L lines comparable, like for like, apples to apples, right? How do we make this data comparable? We follow the USALI structure, the Uniform System of Accounts for the lodging industry. I'm sure you are all familiar with this. It's like a 350 pages Bible, right? And it structures every department, all the accounting codes. It's now on the 11th edition. By the end of the year, there will be the 12th edition published. In this new edition, there will be a whole new section for resorts, which is going to be very interesting. We collect The trial balance for all these thousands of hotels on a monthly basis, all of them account slightly different. This may be a challenge, but so the way we do it, we review every single account and we remap all of them to follow 100% the Usali structure. And that was what really makes it comparable line by line. And this is a way we guarantee every single line is comparable, right? Things can always go wrong. I'm going to give you a quick example here. For example, IT expenses, right? The 11th edition for Usali it's got a separate section for this, right? But a lot of hotels are using still previous versions of Usali, and they are allocating all these expenses to the different departments, right? So these type of challenges, we are dealing with them on a daily basis. And that's why my implementation team, when we are onboarding a new hotel, it takes a 4 or 5 weeks process to review all the accounts, remap, and then it's an automatic process every month. Now let's have a look at some types of benchmarking available in the industry, right? We have internal benchmarking. This is to measure hotels in the same group, and it's good to track best practices, for example, right? External benchmarking, this is to compare ourselves to the outside world. For this, we have, for example, the competitive benchmarking. This is to compare your hotel versus your comp set. And here you are comparing not only revenue management, but also operational, all the operational accounts to track performance, improve profitability, and all this, right? Industry benchmarking, for example, Airbnb, when they launched in 2008, they probably did a research comparing themselves to OTAs. They were probably looking at how easy it was to book and pay with OTAs. Generic benchmarking, this one is when an industry compares to a different industry, right? We may have like retail checking on airline to measure how they use customer data to drive sales, or for example, how they retain employees, right? So there are many ways of benchmarking. Now, another different 3 type of benchmarking, but by what they are comparing. They can be comparing a process, right? Like a previous panel we're talking about the I forgot his name, but he was comparing the beds, the process to ask for a bed, an additional bed, right? That's a process that you benchmark with your comp set, and there's an inefficiency there, and you improve it, right? Another example could be the check-in process. Hotel A takes 10 minutes, Hotel B 5 minutes. You check, you implement some changes, mobile check-in, you train your staff, and the result will be more efficiency and guest satisfaction at the end of the day, right? Performance benchmarking. Look at Formula One teams in the pit stop crews, right? They are all working together to decrease the stop time. Strategic benchmarking. This is focusing on strategic goals. It could be sustainability, exercise, guest experience, loyalty programs, market expansion. So, new approach to operational benchmarking. What does this really mean? The difference is really on the move to focus on owners and investor returns rather than just the RevPAR, right? The concept is not only based on location, but you need to look farther, also based on facilities, restaurants, conference and banqueting space, business aspiration, market segmentation, everything, right? So the full P&L is really covered. And this is what you really need to measure to understand the performance, right? Like a metric I really like is the flow through and the flex, which we are going to look at in the next slide a little bit more in detail. Before I work for HotStats, I used to work in a corporate office in Bangkok, taking care of around 200 hotels around Southeast Asia. I was with my Excel doing financial analysis, cost control missions, budgeting, forecasting, all that, right? In budget season, you can imagine 200 budgets coming my way to review and approve before they share with owners, right? Impossible to check in detail all of them. So the very first line I used to look at when I received these budgets was the flow through, right? Unless the hotel was in a pre-opening phase, ramping up or something, If the flow-through was below 50%, I used to send it back and make friends. So first, we need to check if you have more or less revenue versus budget or last year, whichever you're comparing. If there is a surplus, then you use the flow calculation. If there is a shortfall, you use the flex calculation. Flow-through. This allows us to see how much of that additional revenue flows through the P&L and remains as profit after discounting all the costs and expenses. Flex allows you to see how much you have been able to flex operational costs to compensate the shortfall in revenue. The greater the numbers, the best, right? A healthy flow-through is around 56%. A healthy flex is maybe 30-35%. This is a little bit lower because it's more difficult to save money when you are short on revenue, right? And flow-through definition, to me, is always been difficult to understand, but I give you an example you will always remember and you really, really understand, right? Let's say you start working in a company and your year one salary is €1,000. Year two, you have a raise of €100 and you are paying 30% tax. Your flow-through, the difference between revenue, €100, your expenses, 30% tax, €30, your flow-through, 70%. Right? So that's how we should look at this. And especially in budget season, it's not fair a hotel to just increase occupancy ADR and not look at the cost. So that will reflect in the flow-through. So really, really important line. Let's look at now at how some ratios are used to benchmark, right? The classic ones, top line, you're already familiar with all those, ADR, occupancy, RevPAR. But there are many, many more indicators that they are very interesting. We provide like 500 indicators. For example, conference and banqueting revenue per square meter. You know there is always a conversation with owners and asset managers on how to utilize every square meter of the hotel, right? So an interesting metrics to see. Of course, profitability metrics, ratios as a percentage of revenue, per occupied room, per available room. So there are much more than revenue metrics out there, right? This is a slide showing how data might be used in a benchmarking exercise. Let's take an example, an F&B team, F&B department. You review the data, and you see high beverage costs versus your comp set. You are below the 100% index. Possible issues, free pour, expensive brands. Your team visits the hotel, you check the operation, you set new parameters, new KPIs, you involve the whole team in the exercise, you do some training, new offerings, etc. And then you set targets and a timeline. And then for the results, again, you involve the whole team, you check, did it work? Did my index improve? What's next? Shall we implement this or not? So this is a classic example, and you can apply that to any metric on any department. Some overall tips for doing a proper benchmarking exercise. Involve the whole team, as I mentioned, right? Who is responsible to improve performance? Is it the GM? Is it the director of finance? Head of departments? It's really all of them, right? So I think you should set targets and give ownership to the right person in the right department to improve that line. Context is important. Seasonal hotel, what happened last year? Was there a pandemic? So you need to check on all these things. The comp set, do you have the right comp set? Do you have an aspirational comp set? Segmentation, demand, has anything changed? Any new corporate office in your neighborhood? Any corporate office closed? So at the end of the day, you need to consider all the data you have available to do a proper exercise. And now, enough of theory now. I'm going to show you how to use the data to inform the industry, how we do presentations. We do around 50 conferences every year, all around the world. The audience is mostly owners, investors, asset managers. They really love this data. Business development teams also like it. They use the data for feasibility studies when they need when they are going to operate in a new market, they are not very familiar. They buy data from us. So it's really, really cool data we have. Okay, starting with total revenue per available room. It is higher levels than pre-pandemic levels in all regions. As you can see, the Middle East has seen the greatest top-line increase in the period, followed by Europe. APAC started accelerating their recovery in 2023, basically with the release of restrictions, particularly in China, and now we can see that it's still got some way to go, but it's moving in the right direction. If we look now at total revenue per available room by the different regions in Europe, we see that all of them are performing above 2019 level. And Southern Europe is definitely the region leading the growth, is mainly because of the leisure business. The trends in the top line are also present when we are looking at GOP and profitability. Here we have GOP per available room. The US is quite flat in 2023. It seems like it has already reached the end of recovery, and it is now at pre-pandemic levels. Europe and the Middle East are still increasing, but at a slower pace over the last 12 months. And APAC is, as I said before, is going in the right direction and closing the gap. Looking again at profitability by the different regions in Europe, Southern Europe is by far the one leading the profitability growth and increasing the gap with the rest of the regions. This is like 30% above January 2020 now. This is a very interesting graph where we plot two dimensions. The horizontal axis is the percentage change of total revenue per available room. This is rolling 12 months between March 2024 and 2023. And the vertical axis is the percentage change of GOP margin for the same period. The green quadrant, these are the markets where both total revenue per available room and GOP per available room are greater than 2023. Blue quadrant, these are the markets where total revenue per available room is greater than 2023, but GOP per available room is below. This blue quadrant is a clear sample of negative flow-through, right? Sorry. And this is, with this negative flow-through story, we see like the cost expansions are eroding the margins, right? Looking at revenue split now by main departments, this is indexed month by month to 2019, and you can see that Europe, F&B revenue is up by 5%, conference and banqueting minus 8%, still struggling, and rooms is actually the department holding it all together with a plus 15%. This is a very interesting view of what's happening, and it's a note of caution for the trend in 2024. Hotels have been doing more with less, and ADR is really the reason for this. ADR is the key element holding the whole profitability puzzle together, and it's very important to maintain all this total revenue to offset the costs. Looking now at how the revenue split versus last year. Outlet revenue, we will see this small growth is nowhere near where it needs to be to keep up with the costs. Cancellation and attrition, this is at minus 12%. This is actually, 80% of this is actually coming from attrition rather than cancellation. We see a change of strategy in how hoteliers are holding event organizers to account for their uptake of contracted F&B and rooms. And this has significantly decreased, actually, since the pandemic, looking from the pandemic and last year, and it was plus 37% versus 2019. So the trend is changing here. This slide is super interesting. It's the ADR change versus 2019. And you can see all ADRs growing significantly. This clearly proves that the commercial effort and the commercial plan to grow ADR in all segments to support profitability, right? To offset all these costs. it just highlights again how much ADR is contributing to the overall profitability picture. Looking now at cost areas, sales and marketing spending continues to grow as efforts to attract and retain customers in all segments are increasing. And utilities is an interesting one. Not the difference between UK and Europe. This could be related to more government helps, support, but also this is Q1, and this is the highest part of the year for usage in the UK, for example. So let's see how the summer looks, especially in Southern Europe, where we normally see a peak increase in utility costs. Now, conference and banqueting is an area of F&B that has some question marks. Let's look at the revenue per square meter and how is this progressing. All cities are ahead 2023 and 2022, but when we look versus 2019, we see very stable markets like Berlin, Paris, and London really behind, right? The main reason for this is the lack of demand, and we can really see this, for example, London. We see they are losing some business to the UK provinces, and we can see this mainly because of the cost of London rooms. And when we look at the growth in corporate mix outside London, this supports this graph. Now I just wanted to show you F&B profitability impact by country within Europe. The picture is very clear with all showing a significant reduction versus 2019, and in some cases they are behind even last year, compared to last year. And looking now at GOP margins by asset class. It's very interesting that despite all the high ADRs and all the revenue increases, the overall profitability picture shows that most of the markets are still struggling, except for mid-scale and ultra-luxe. Mid-scale is the clear winner, leading the positive trend with this, as you can see, the orange line is the ramp up is really significant. And to finish, I just want to do a quick summary of the main points of revenue growth slowing down. F&B is a challenge due to both slow revenue growth and high costs. The rise on energy costs is calming, but we may never see them at 2019 levels. Labor costs are the key challenge, and mid-scale is the best performing asset class when we look at profitability. Thank you very much.